The sun had only just started to climb over the trees that circled Brookside Park, brushing the grass with a soft gold glow that made everything look calm and harmless. Morning joggers moved along the paved paths, their breath rising in small misty clouds. A few parents pushed strollers, sipping from coffee cups, while older men played slow, quiet games of chess at the wooden tables near the playground. It was the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen, a place where people came to breathe, to forget the weight of their lives for a little while. And on most days, that illusion held. At the far end of the park, where the tall oaks grew so close together that their shadows blended, a man sat on a worn green bench with his young son. He had the kind of tired eyes that came from years of trying without ever really resting, but he carried himself with a quiet strength that made people notice him even when he wasn't speaking. His son sat next to him, legs swinging, holding a small toy car that scraped rhythmically against the bench. They had been coming to this park almost every morning for months. It gave the boy space to run and the father a moment to feel steady, even if the rest of the world felt like it was stacked against him. Nearby, two officers parked their cruiser in the same spot they always chose when they wanted to patrol without drawing much attention. They watched the park through half-open windows, their radios low, their eyes wandering from person to person. They looked like they belonged there, like they were just doing their job, but there was something underneath their calm expressions, an edge, a restlessness, that made people who picked up on small things feel uneasy without knowing why. The younger officer kept tapping the steering wheel, as if waiting for something to break the silence. The older one had a way of staring at people for too long, as if searching for trouble even when there was none. Most people who came to the park never noticed them, or if they did, they didn't think much of it. But a few regulars had started to feel the shift in the air whenever the cruiser appeared. There had been whispers about the officers stopping people for no clear reason, asking questions that didn't make sense, turning small moments into tense ones. Nothing official had happened yet, nothing anyone could file a complaint about, but the signs were there if you looked closely enough. Tight shoulders, nervous glances, people leaving the park earlier than they meant to. The father on the bench knew enough about the world to trust his instincts. He had learned long ago that peace could change in a second, especially when someone with power decided they wanted control. But he pushed the thought away as his son laughed, holding the toy car above his head as if it were flying. For a moment, everything felt simple. He reminded himself that he couldn't live in fear every minute of the day. He just wanted his child to have a morning of joy, something normal, something easy. Still, even in that quiet moment, there were cracks in the calm. The boy kept glancing toward the trees as if expecting someone to appear. A woman walking her dog tightened her grip on the leash when she saw the patrol car. A young man sitting on the grass with headphones in kept checking behind him, not because he expected danger, but because he didn't want to be mistaken for someone doing something wrong. The park looked peaceful on the surface, but anyone paying attention could sense that things were building towards something, like pressure under a lid that was slowly starting to shake. Further down the path, a man with a camera took photos of the lake, trying to capture the way the light reflected off the water. He didn't notice the officers or the father or anyone else around him. He was lost in his own world, chasing beauty and quiet moments. But even he would later say that the air had felt strange that morning, like the park was holding its breath. People often say they felt something before a crisis, even if they didn't recognize it at the time. Maybe it's the way birds go silent or how the wind stops for a second. Maybe it's the way people move a little slower, talk a little softer without knowing why. The officer in the passenger seat leaned forward when he saw the father on the bench. His eyes narrowed, not in recognition but in assumption. He nudged his partner and nodded in that direction. There was no real reason to look twice. A dad and his kid, nothing suspicious, nothing unusual, but something in the officer's stare said he wasn't looking for facts. He was looking for a reason to act or maybe an excuse. That was the first sign that the day was about to shift in a direction no one could take back. The father didn't notice them at first. He was too focused on his son, who was now racing the toy car up and down the metal rail of the bench. He smiled at the sound, a small, tired smile that still carried warmth. He had worked late the night before, trying to pick up extra hours to make rent. He always felt like he was one step away from losing everything, and the weight of that fear had carved lines into his face long before he should have had them. But here, in the soft morning light with his son beside him, he felt lighter. Not free, but close to something like it. Underneath that peaceful moment, though, there were unspoken struggles that shaped every part of his life. He was a single father, trying to raise a child in a world that didn't make room for people like him. He had dealt with more than his share of assumptions, more than his share of being looked at like he didn't belong. He had learned to stay quiet, to choose his battles, to keep his hands visible whenever he spoke to someone in uniform. These were not things he wanted his son to learn, but he knew the day would come when he'd have to explain them. He hoped it wouldn't be today. The boy tugged at his sleeve and asked if they could walk to the swings. The father stood, stretching his sore back, and took the child's hand. As they headed toward the playground, he caught a glimpse of the patrol car out of the corner of his eye. The officers were still watching him. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the instinct to be careful. He kept walking, keeping his steps steady, telling himself there was no reason to worry. But the world didn't always care whether someone had done something wrong. Sometimes it cared only about power and about who was allowed to hold it. As the father pushed his son on the swing, the chains squeaking softly, the officers opened their doors. Their feet hit the ground at the same time, and the sound carried through the park like a warning. A few people looked up, but most tried not to stare. They had seen moments like this before, and they knew better than to get involved. What none of them knew was that the man on the swing set had a past that would change everything. Not a criminal past, not something dangerous or violent, but something powerful. Something the officers had no idea they were walking toward. A truth that would tear their careers apart and leave the entire town questioning everything they believed about justice, control, and the people who were supposed to protect them. The morning still looked peaceful, but the calm was already gone. Only the illusion of it remained, stretching thin as the officers began their slow walk toward the father and his child. The moment before a storm is always the quietest, and in Brookside Park, that quiet was about to break. The officers' slow steps across the grass seemed harmless to anyone who wasn't paying attention, but the father felt the shift the moment their eyes locked with his. His hands tightened on the swing chains without him realizing, the metal pressing lines into his palms. His son kept laughing, unaware of the danger forming at the edge of his world. The officers weren't walking with purpose yet, but there was something too casual in the way they moved, like they already believed they had the right to approach, to question, to assume. They didn't come straight to him at first. They stood near the playground entrance, pretending to scan the area, watching him from the corner of their eyes. The older officer spoke low, saying something that made the younger one smirk. It wasn't the kind of smirk someone gives when they feel safe. It was the kind they give when they feel powerful, when they think no one will stop them. The father tried to keep himself calm. He fixed his eyes on his son and pushed the swing with gentle, steady movements. But every few seconds he glanced toward the officers, waiting to see if they would move closer. His breathing was slow and forced, the kind that only comes from someone who has been through this kind of moment too many times before. He didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want to scare his child. But he knew things could turn bad fast, and sometimes all it took was a look or the wrong word spoken in fear. The moment that shifted everything was small, almost invisible. The father's phone buzzed inside his pocket, and he pulled it out to check a message. His son asked who it was, and he smiled as he answered. But from a distance, the officers saw something different. They saw a man reaching into his pocket. The younger officer stiffened, his hand brushing over the radio clipped to his chest. The older one lowered his head, narrowing his eyes. Then they started walking toward him again, this time with a quiet, focused intention. When the father noticed, he tucked the phone away and lifted his son out of the swing, holding the boy's small hand. He didn't want his child sitting alone between metal bars if something went wrong. He tried to leave the playground, but the officers reached the entrance first and blocked the way without making it obvious. They didn't touch him, didn't speak, just positioned themselves so he'd have to pass close to them if he wanted to leave. It was a tactic he recognized all too well: force without touching, control without commands. The older officer finally stepped forward and asked a question that had nothing to do with anything. "Everything all right here?" The father nodded, keeping his voice calm. "We're fine." The officer's eyes moved over him, looking for something to use, anything. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" The father didn't answer right away. His son squeezed his hand, sensing something was wrong now. The father forced a small smile down at him and then looked back at the officers. "Is there a reason?" The question was simple, polite even, but it made the younger officer's shoulders rise. He didn't like being questioned. He stepped closer. "We just need to make sure everything's okay." But their eyes said otherwise. They weren't checking on him, they were sizing him up. This moment should have ended with a simple explanation, a normal conversation. But the younger officer was already irritated, already letting emotions twist the situation into something personal. He asked the father for his ID, and when the man hesitated, because his wallet was deep inside his backpack, sitting on the bench, tension rose like a spark catching dry grass. The father tried to explain that he had to walk across the playground to get it. The younger officer cut him off, telling him not to make this harder than it needs to be. The son clung to his leg now, his small face tight with fear. Parents nearby pulled their children closer, not because the father looked dangerous, but because they knew from experience that these moments could go wrong in ways no one wanted to witness. As the officers grew more impatient, the father's mind raced through every past moment where he had been judged before even speaking. He remembered nights being stopped on his way home from work for fitting a description. He remembered being talked down to, threatened with tickets or warnings for things he didn't do. He remembered being told he looked nervous, as if he had any reason not to be nervous. All of that weight came back now, pushing against his ribs. Still, he kept his voice calm. "My wallet is just over there, I'll get it." But when he took a single step toward the bench, the younger officer moved in front of him and put a hand on his chest, not pushing, not grabbing, but blocking the path in a way that made the father's body jerk back in instinct. That movement, that tiny flinch, gave the officer what he had been waiting for. "Why are you jumping back?" he asked, too loud, too sharp. "You hiding something?" People stopped watching their kids. Eyes turned toward the confrontation. Someone pulled out a phone. The older officer noticed and immediately tried to calm things, stepping between them with a forced, controlled voice. "Sir, look, we just need to talk. If everything's fine, you'll be on your way." But the father wasn't stupid. He could see the shift in the older officer's face, too. There was no reason for any of this. No complaint, no suspicion. Just a moment that had spiraled out of their control because one of them wanted to feel bigger. Pressure built with every passing second, fueled by the crowd, the tension, the officer's pride, the father's fear, and the child who now had tears pooling in the corners of his eyes. And just when things were stretching toward a breaking point, something unexpected happened. The father's phone rang again. This time he slowly reached for it, making every movement clear and visible. The older officer nodded for him to answer it. The younger one clenched his jaw, annoyed he wasn't allowed to escalate things further. The father put the phone to his ear and turned slightly away, trying to shield his son from hearing the fear in his voice. He whispered a few words, and the person on the other end responded in a tone that didn't match the chaos in the air, calm, steady, authoritative. When the father hung up, something in his posture shifted. Not confidence, not defiance, just a cold resolve. He looked at the older officer and said quietly, "I need both of your badge numbers." The younger one laughed under his breath, the kind of laugh people use when they think someone is bluffing. "And why's that?" he asked. The father held his son closer and answered, "Because I just made a call." The air went still, as if even the trees were waiting for the officer's reaction. It wasn't what he said that made the older officer tense. It was how he said it. Calm, controlled, like someone who knew he had protection behind him, not from a friend, not from a lawyer, but from a place neither officer expected. People around them sensed the shift too. The mood changed from fear to curiosity. But the officers weren't ready to back down, not yet. The older one told him again to stay where he was. The younger one stepped closer, crossing the line between authority and personal anger. His voice rose. He accused the father of acting suspiciously. He reached for his arm with the clear intention of detaining him, not because a crime had happened, but because his pride had been hurt. The father pulled his son behind him, whispering for him to stay back. His heart was pounding. Memories of past humiliations and close calls flooded him, mixing with a growing fury he had tried to keep buried. He wasn't a violent man. He wasn't looking for a confrontation. But being pushed again and again by people who thought they had the right to do it had shaped him in ways the officers would never understand. The younger officer grabbed his wrist. The father jerked away instinctively. The officer stepped forward, ready to take him down, and that moment, right there, was the snap of the rope holding everything together. But before he could act, a voice crackled through his radio. Not the usual dispatcher voice, not someone local, a tone too formal, too sharp. Both officers froze for half a second. The younger one frowned. The older one straightened his back and brought the radio closer to his ear. The message came again, this time clearly, the weight of it settling over them like cold steel. Stand down. Immediate command review. Officers on scene will await instruction. The younger officer's face went pale. What? The father didn't move. He just held his son and watched the panic grow in their eyes. The older officer clicked the radio trying to respond, but he was cut off by another voice. A deeper one. Higher rank, not from their precinct, not from their city. Neither officer expected to ever speak directly to them. This wasn't normal protocol. This wasn't something that just happened. And for the first time all morning, the officers understood one thing. The man they had tried to corner was not someone they should have laid hands on, because the phone call he had made wasn't to a friend or a local official. It was to someone far above their reach, someone with the power to end careers in a single breath. People around the playground watched with wide eyes as the officers, once so confident and eager to control the situation, now stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. The father didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he only picked up his son, held him close, and waited for whatever came next. Inside him, though, the storm that had been building for years, the humiliation, the anger, the helplessness, began to settle. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one standing powerless. And the officers, who had pushed him without cause, were starting to realize just how badly they had misjudged the man standing in front of them. Tension didn't break at that moment. It deepened. Because the real consequences, the ones neither officer was prepared to face, were only just beginning to unfold. The air in the park felt heavier than before, thick with something sharp and tense, like the moment before a storm hits the ground. Parents whispered to each other, keeping their children close, and the officers stood frozen with their radios in their hands, unsure of what their next move should be. The father held his son against his chest as if he could shield him from everything, even though he knew the danger wasn't physical anymore. It was something deeper, uglier, and far less predictable. The message on the radio had rattled the officers, but it didn't stop them completely. The younger one stepped back, packing in small circles like a man trying to hold in his anger. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his face twitched. Every few seconds he glared at the father, unable to accept that someone he thought he could intimidate had just been given authority he didn't expect. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was humiliation, the kind that stuck under the skin and made people act without thinking. The older officer forced himself to stay calm, but even he couldn't hide the fear growing inside him. He kept glancing between the father and the radio, waiting for more instructions, waiting to understand how someone in a quiet park could have triggered interference from a higher chain of command. His breath was shallow, and his fingers trembled slightly by his holster, a detail he didn't want anyone to see. The father didn't want to fight. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to leave safely with his child. But the younger officer wasn't done. That much was clear. Something in him had been cracked open, and now all that anger, unspoken, unprocessed, running deep inside him, was pushing him toward a choice that would change everything. A new voice came through the radio, firm, precise, carrying authority like a blade. All units at Brookside Park hold position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Internal command review in progress. The younger officer snapped. "Are you kidding me?" he muttered under his breath. He turned the volume down, as if silencing the order could change reality. His partner reached out a hand to stop him, but he shook it off sharply. The father noticed the shift. His instincts, sharpened by years of trying to survive moments just like this, told him things were about to escalate in a dangerous direction. He gently whispered to his son, telling him to sit behind the slide, to stay low, and not to move unless he called him. The boy's eyes were wide and wet, but he listened. He crawled behind the slide and hugged his knees, trembling. The father turned back, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. The younger officer began walking toward him again, faster now, his steps uneven. "You think you can call someone and threaten us? You think you can pull rank you don't even have?" His voice rose with each word. The father stayed still. "I didn't threaten anyone. I called because I was scared. You put your hands on me. I have a right to protect my son." Those words, "protect my son," pushed the officer over the edge. He walked right up to the father, close enough that their breaths mixed. His eyes were wild now, flashing with something dark and unstable. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I don't care who you called." The father kept his voice steady. "Please step back." But the younger officer didn't. He grabbed the father's arm again, harder this time, digging his fingers into flesh. The father flinched but didn't fight back. A few onlookers gasped. Someone shouted for the officer to stop. But the officer didn't hear anything except the roar of his own fury. The older officer rushed forward, trying to pull his partner away. "Stop! We've been ordered to stand down." "Don't touch me," the younger one shouted, shrugging him off violently. The father stumbled backward, his foot catching on the edge of the sandbox. He fell hard, hitting the packed earth with a dull thud that sent pain shooting through his back. His breath escaped him in a sharp gasp. For a moment he stayed on the ground, stunned, the world spinning slightly. His son screamed from behind the slide, the kind of sound that cuts straight through bone. The father pushed himself up on shaky hands, desperate to get between the child and the officer, but he wasn't fast enough. The younger officer reached for his gun. It happened too fast for anyone to fully process. 1 second his hand was hovering above the holster, trembling with adrenaline, and the next the weapon was halfway out. He didn't draw it with purpose. It was instinct, pure reaction driven by anger and loss of control. But in moments like this, instinct can kill. The older officer saw it before anyone else and shoved him hard. "Are you insane?" The shove threw the younger officer off balance. His finger brushed the trigger. A single shot cracked through the air like the sky itself splitting open. For a moment no one moved, no one screamed. The entire park seemed to freeze. Birds scattered from the trees. A dog barked in the distance. A mother pulled her child behind her, shielding them with her arms. Dust rose from the ground where the bullet hit, a few inches from where the father had been standing. A few inches. The father stared at the small crater in the dirt. His ears rang. He couldn't breathe. His son's sobs echoed inside him like breaking glass. The realization washed over him in a wave so strong it nearly knocked him back down. He had almost been killed, in front of his child, in a park, for nothing. The younger officer's face went white as the reality sank in. His gun shook in his hand. His breathing became rapid, uneven. Regret hit him sharp, overwhelming, immediate, but it was too late. The line had been crossed. The older officer lunged for the weapon, grabbed it, and forced it out of his partner's grip. "What have you done?" he shouted. "Do you understand what you just did?" The younger officer backed away, stumbling, shaking his head again and again. "I didn't mean," he moved, "I thought." His words broke apart. But no one was listening to him anymore. People were yelling now. Someone was calling 911 even though the police were already there. A woman shouted that she had everything on camera. Another person screamed that the officer should be arrested. The crowd, once scared and silent, now swelled with anger. The father finally moved, not toward the officers, not toward the crowd. He ran to his son. He dropped to his knees, pulling the boy into his arms. The child buried his face into his father's chest, sobbing uncontrollably. The father's body shook as he held him, tears spilling down his cheeks, tears of fear, relief, and pure, shaking rage. He pressed his forehead against his son's hair and whispered, "You're safe. I promise you're safe," even though he wasn't sure he believed it. The aftermath tore through the park like a second explosion. The older officer was calling for backup, his voice cracking. He kept glancing at his partner as if he no longer recognized him. The younger officer walked in small circles, holding his hands on his head, muttering to himself. "I didn't mean to fire. It was an accident. He moved. I thought he..." He couldn't finish the sentence. People were shouting at him. Some called him a danger. Some called him a murderer. Some screamed things that made him flinch like he had been struck. He saw the father holding his son and broke. He covered his face with both hands and bent forward, a sound escaping him that wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a scream, just something broken. The father stood slowly, holding his son against his shoulder. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself upright. He faced the officers with a look that shook both men to their core. It wasn't anger. It was disappointing. Deep, exhausted, soul-tired disappointment. The kind that made the younger officer's stomach twist with guilt he had never felt before. But beneath that disappointment was something sharper, rising from the deepest part of the father's pain. Resolve. Because now there was no hiding what had happened, no brushing it aside, no twisting the story. A shot had been fired. A life had almost been taken. A child had almost lost his father. And someone, somewhere, was already preparing to answer the phone call that had caused their radios to erupt minutes earlier. The crime wasn't a killing. It was the moment a man with power pulled a trigger in fear and anger, nearly ending a life that never should have been threatened. It was the moment that exposed everyone, officers, witnesses, the system itself, to a truth they could no longer deny. Chaos spread through Brookside Park, turning a quiet morning into a storm of shouting, crying, panic, and shock. The father held his son tightly, his heart pounding with the weight of what almost happened. And as sirens began to echo in the distance, racing toward the park, he understood one thing clearly. This wasn't over. Not even close. After the shot echoed through the park, everything changed in an instant for the officers, the father, his son, and everyone watching. The younger officer's face drained of color, his hands trembling as the weight of what he'd almost done crashed down on him. He muttered apologies to himself, as if saying the words could erase the moment his finger squeezed the trigger. His partner tried to steady him, but inside, both men knew things would never be the same. The father, still holding his son close, felt a flood of emotions crashing inside him. Relief that his child was safe, terror at how close they had come to tragedy, and a deep, burning anger at the officers who had pushed the situation so far. Around them, the crowd that had gathered shifted from stunned silence to a chorus of gasps, cries, and shouted questions. People pulled their children closer, their faces filled with disbelief and fear. In the days that followed, the community struggled to make sense of what had happened. Friends and family of those involved were caught in a storm of confusion and pain. Some refused to believe that someone they cared for could be involved in such a violent moment, clinging to memories of better times. Others wrestled with guilt for not seeing the warning signs or stopping the conflict before it escalated. The father's loved ones felt a complicated mix of pride for his strength and sorrow for the trauma he and his son had endured. Meanwhile, the officers faced their own inner battles, caught between guilt, denial, and the pressure of the unfolding investigation. Some tried to justify their actions, claiming it was a split-second mistake, while others were haunted by sleepless nights and the growing sense that their careers and lives might be forever altered. The media's attention only made things worse. Headlines exploded across newspapers and social media, often oversimplifying or twisting the story for clicks. The father, once an ordinary man trying to protect his child, was suddenly a symbol of a larger fight against injustice. The officers, once trusted public servants, became faces of controversy and blame. Public opinion divided sharply, some people behind the father, seeing him as a victim of bias and abuse of power, while others sided with the officers, insisting they were simply trying to keep the peace. The town's peaceful reputation took a hit, and a cloud of distrust settled over the community. Schools tightened security, neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, and everyday routines were tinged with caution. Legal investigations dug deeper, exposing more details and raising difficult questions about authority, accountability, and justice. The father's quiet life was upended by court dates, interviews, and the constant weight of public scrutiny. His son, innocent and unaware of the full gravity of what happened, clung to his father in a way that broke hearts. The officers faced internal reviews, disciplinary hearings, and mounting criticism. Behind closed doors, friendships fractured, families questioned loyalties, and everyone involved struggled to find a way forward. The crime had left scars not just on those present in the park that day, but on the entire community, reminding everyone how quickly normal life can unravel, and how the search for truth often comes with a painful cost. The months that followed the incident at the park brought changes none of the people involved could have imagined. The legal system moved forward, painstakingly unraveling what had happened in those tense moments. The younger officer who fired the shot faced criminal charges, reckless use of a firearm, assault, and later, manslaughter charges after the investigation revealed a pattern of aggressive behavior and bias in his past conduct. The older officer was disciplined for failing to control his partner and for participating in a cover-up attempt, which included altered reports and misleading statements to supervisors. Their careers, once steady and respected, ended abruptly, leaving behind shattered lives and families wrestling with shame and uncertainty. For the father, justice was a complex and bittersweet journey. Though the officers were held accountable, the trauma they had inflicted did not vanish with the verdict. He had won a legal battle, but the emotional scars, the moments of fear, the loss of innocence for his son, the community's wary stares, would stay with him forever. His life, once marked by quiet routine, was now intertwined with a larger story of injustice and resistance. The public backlash was fierce and divided. Some people saw the father as a symbol of courage, standing up against unfair treatment, using his voice and connections to demand accountability. His phone call to the Pentagon became a rallying point, sparking conversations about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the abuse of power. Others, however, viewed the situation through a lens of skepticism, questioning his motives or minimizing the officer's wrongdoing. Social media exploded with heated debates, revealing deep fractures within society about race, authority, and justice. The incident forced a community and a nation to confront uncomfortable truths. It highlighted the often invisible struggles that many face daily, the fear of being judged not by who they are but by how they look, the imbalance of power that can escalate ordinary moments into life-threatening encounters, and the urgent need for systemic change to protect the vulnerable. Beyond the headlines and courtrooms, the story opened a window into the complexities of human behavior. The officers, once seen simply as enforcers of law, were revealed as flawed individuals shaped by their own fears, biases, and pressures. Their actions were not just a result of training or duty, but also of personal weaknesses and the dangerous desire to assert control in situations where they felt challenged. The father, meanwhile, embodied resilience and the difficult path of defending dignity in a world quick to assume guilt. His choice to make a call to a powerful authority reflected both desperation and a deep understanding of the systems that govern justice. It was a reminder that power does not only come from weapons or badges, it also comes from knowledge, connections, and the courage to speak up. At its core, this story is about morality and the fragile balance between justice and abuse. It forces us to question what fairness truly means when power is unevenly distributed, and how fear can distort judgment on all sides. It challenges us to see beyond simple black and white narratives and recognize the human emotions driving every choice: fear, anger, hope, and regret. The case serves as a cautionary tale about how quickly situations can spiral when respect and understanding are absent, and how the consequences ripple far beyond a single moment. In the end, the lives of those involved were forever changed. Careers were destroyed, families broken, and a community left to rebuild trust that had been deeply damaged. Yet amid the pain and loss, seeds of awareness and change were planted. The incident sparked reforms in local police training, increased oversight, and greater community involvement in law enforcement policies. It ignited conversations that had long been avoided, shining a light on the need for empathy and accountability. The father's story became a powerful example of standing up against injustice, reminding us that even in the darkest moments, there is strength in speaking truth and demanding respect. Justice in this case was neither simple nor complete. It was messy, painful, and filled with contradictions, much like the people at its center. But it also showed that change is possible when individuals refuse to be silenced and when society is willing to listen. The tragedy at the park is a reflection of the broader struggle for fairness and dignity that continues to challenge communities everywhere. It is a reminder that the path to justice requires not only laws and punishment, but also understanding, compassion, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.